let's go and get our rights back. Like, let's just use it, get our rights back, and end this madness so we can all move on with our lives. The reasons for female-only spaces have not gone away. So we should not be in a position to have to justify them. I'm sick of when people go, but why do you need a female-only space? Because we want them. So in 2020, I effectively launched a female-only social networking app where women could find roommates and freelance work and lesbian dating and connect, like, just for emotional support or have a voice. We had like a female-only Twitter-style feed, things like that. Then in 2022, I got an Australian human rights complaint from an individual named Roxy Tickle. It was for gender identity discrimination, and it was against both Giggle and myself. So it's two respondents in the case, even though I am the CEO of Giggle. And basically, with how it works in the Australian Human Rights Commission, you can settle something before going to court. In this case, because it was the Australian Human Rights Commission, not a state-based one, it would be straight to federal court. And the conditions for conciliation were so ludicrous, basically, that I would have to let him on. I should say he's a man who claims to be a woman. I would have to let him on, all men who claim to be women, go to sex and gender education, which could only be re-education because I know about sex and gender.
Tell me that again. You would be sent on a course.
Yes.
Which would educate you in gender identity.
Basically, it could only be re-education because what else would it be?
Reprogramming?
Yeah, basically. Right. And then the last condition, which this one bothered me the most, actually. Well, not the most, but more than the other, like letting him on. But it was that I would have to moderate the content of what women would say so not to offend men who claim to be women. And so I was like, we'd created this place where women could have a voice and speak freely away from men. And then suddenly there was this man saying, well, no, not only am I going to be there, but I'm going to control what you say. So I said no to conciliation. I was 15 weeks pregnant when I got the AHRC complaint. And by this time of going back and forth, I was end of second trimester going into third. And I was having a geriatric pregnancy because I was 37.
It's a lovely way of explaining a slightly older pregnancy.
It's literally, it's the next issue after this. Right. That's the next issue I'm going to focus on, changing that. But so I said no to conciliation because I knew that I wouldn't agree to any of it. So there was no point sitting in a room going back and forth. I was never going to agree to it. So then from that, he had 60 days to file in federal court, which he did.
Hang on a minute. Let's go back a little bit. Because I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm known to be a very, very hardline, uncompromising feminist. I'm a lesbian. I've been in the trenches arguing with men about rape and domestic violence and misogyny and the like. Okay, so you're clearly an extremely strong, determined woman. But you didn't have that background in this, did you? Weren't you a Hollywood screenwriter at some stage?
Yeah.
But you came to your feminist consciousness, from what I've heard, and we've talked before, and I've read lots about your case. You're someone who has none of it. You will not take this from men, will you?
No.
Just give us a bit about your background from Hollywood.
So I went to Hollywood when I was 24. I stopped doing a master's degree in philosophy. I stopped one credit shy. I really didn't like the course I had to, last one I had to do, and I was like, oh, no. And I got on a plane and I went to Hollywood. I knew two people and I was like, I'm going to go and write movies. How hard can it be? And it turns out it was actually relatively easy for me to get into the industry. It took 1 year for me to sell my first script, which I got signed to one of the biggest talent agencies. I got a manager, I got a proper working visa. And that working visa, I was on an O1 visa, and I could only make money selling screenplays. I couldn't even, there were certain deals that would happen later on where they were trying to get me on as like a associate producer or something, and I couldn't because my visa was screenwriting. And now, like almost 40, look, I can sort of understand a lot of things a lot more. I was so naive going over there and actually putting myself in an incredibly vulnerable position. I thought I was, so empowered and strong and brave going over there, but no.
Which you were.
Well, I was, but what I was actually effectively did is I put myself in a situation where, because I could only make money doing this one thing, it meant a lot of people had control over my life. I didn't. And so when I got into the industry, that's kind of when the nightmare started. This would have, by the time I was in the industry, it's like 2010, 2011. This is pre-Me Too. So all the horror stories are true. Like, it was horrific. And the reality is most screenwriters are men. So there are obviously women screenwriters, and there's some that are really, really successful. But a 27-year-old Australian sitting there talking, and I'd write romantic comedies, and they were always about like strong but flawed women, and they were always, sort of like, sometimes they'd be like sexually liberated or something. And I remember my manager one time saying, like, that's your brand, sex is your brand. And I was like, but it isn't. I just wrote one movie about like the stud versus slut mentality, but it's not my brand. That's just one script. My brand is strong but flawed women. And so when you sell a script or you put a spec script out into the industry, you have to go to general meetings. And sometimes you can do like 5 of them a day, and it's, you've got to go and sit there and sell yourself of why you should be the one to write their next script, whether it's your own or one of their ideas. So you've got to, tell them stuff about yourself. So I was basically just sitting in these rooms, giving them this story of how vulnerable I was. This is what I know, like, realize in hindsight. And the level of sexual harassment that then eventually escalated to sexual assault was crazy. I got to the point I couldn't write anymore, and that was my livelihood. I was just a shell of a person by this point because I was just being pulled in opposite directions. And eventually when I went to therapy for it, she said, like, my brain was in survival mode. It was just like, don't write a script because the script will send you into the rooms where the bad things will happen. Right. So yeah, I left. I was like, it's just movies. This should be fun, and it's not. This is no way to live.
It's interesting though, because obviously we're in a Me Too moment right now where women are fighting back very, very kind of vigorously against gender ideology and the harms it's doing to us and to girls and other women. But many of us in this fight that will not shut up, that will not cave in, have experienced sexual assault and sexual harassment, and we've spoken about it and we've written about it, including Jo Rowling and other women in the public eye, but also so many women I know whose names aren't in the public eye. So do you think that when Tickle started his nonsense, and I want to ask you about the detail of how he tried to inveigle his way into the app, do you think that you just kind of went into that mode of, no, not again, I'm not taking this?
100%. In the sense of, my mentality is, really shitty men destroyed the first thing I wanted to do professionally. I'm not letting it happen again. Absolutely no way. I don't have a third idea.
Right. It's a good idea.
But it's like, I have actually spent my professional life women-centered in some way, whether it was, first of all, I wanted to write movies about them. I was very much write what you know. So I was like, I'll write about being a woman. And then, obviously creating an app for women, which is very connected to that, because when I was in therapy to recover from what had happened in Hollywood, it was my therapist who said, you need a strong female support network in your life. And it was the light bulb moment. I was like, you're right. What happened in Hollywood, it would have been quite different if all of us women were connected, where the men didn't know what we were talking about and we could all share our stories. It would have been a totally different situation, because that's what Me Too highlighted, is that women didn't know it was happening to everyone else. So we all thought it was our own fault. And I don't think it's an accident that gender ideology has replaced Me Too. Because that was the movement about women's boundaries. Then it was, and of course, a lot of men didn't like that. And it's been replaced by a movement where women's boundaries are illegal.
I 100% agree. To me, it's a men's rights movement. Yeah. It's a misogynistic movement. Mm-hmm. And those that are the trans activists, the ones whose names we know, Tickle and many, many others, India Willoughby, all of them, they are out to take our rights.
Yes.
And to, as you say, destroy our boundaries. I mean, tell me on that subject, how Tickle ended up on the app and how you discovered that he was on a women-only app. Was it the dating bit?
So when we created it, obviously we had to work out how to create an online female space that would be female only, because you actually can't just leave it up to the good graces of men to leave it alone. I knew that. I didn't know about this demographic of men, but I knew that there were crappy men out there. If there weren't, we wouldn't need a female-only space as much as we do. I think it would still be fun to just hang out with the girls. But anyway, so there is basically AI that can just scan photos and just go, that's male, that's female. It's basically just technology doing what the human eye does. I didn't invent this software or anything. And when I was told about this, I was like, well, that's fantastic. That's not controversial at all. Because keep in mind, I knew nothing about gender identity ideology at this point. And I was like, well, we can tell like male or female by looking at people. We do it subconsciously every second of the day. And we take selfies all the time. So this is like the complete, like non-invasive, non-controversial way to do this. I thought, fantastic. I could not have been more wrong. So he went on and he passed through it. That's not because he's a woman. We had it set to 94% accuracy because we found that 94% accuracy, no woman was denied access unless it was a really pixelated photo or had no depth of field because the software would think that it was a photo of a photo. But just based on the actual individual, a woman would not get denied. Some men would go through. And rightly or wrongly, we made the decision that we would rather manually remove a man occasionally than deny a woman. So he got through based on that. And then I don't remember removing him. I know it would have been me. The reason I don't remember it is because this is not an event. Thousands upon thousands of men, sometimes every day, like a slow day, or a slow day would be maybe 5 men, but that was rare. A slow week would be 100 just trying to get on. Again, rare. Most of the time it was thousands trying to get on. And sometimes within an hour, because we'd be under attack, and so they'd just be coming at us. And we had in 2 years, we had about 10 really big attacks of men trying to get on. And it was horrible every time it happened.
Just think about that. Why do they do it? They can't allow us to have women-only space. They have the Garrick Club, a club that's been in the press today about men-only membership. And, I mean, men have the world.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible to think that they cannot bear us to have an app just for women.
When we were developing it, again, I didn't know about gender identity ideology, but one of the examples that I would just think of all the time was Grindr. Now, obviously now it has fallen to this nonsense, but when it was created in like 2010, it was specifically male, and then on top of that, homosexual male only.
Right. That's
what it was. So I was just like, oh, look, so, and then like the Her app as well. Like these were apps that were very sex-based, and they're classed as niche apps, basically. So I was like, ours is just a niche app, just like that. Actually, now even you would say the only one because they're a free-for-all. So what was it? So yeah, he
kicked him out.
I kicked him out. I have no recollection of it. It was just another day at the office. Then a few weeks after that, and this is when he became a person of note in my life, he called and texted my phone. Now, I literally have no other person has ever, to do with Giggle, like as a potential user or an ex-user or a current user, no one has ever contacted my phone.
So he found your number?
Yes.
And he actually called it?
Yes. And so because the only anchor, like the only data we had basically from users, you have to have an anchor for a user so that the app will function basically. And the only thing we had was a phone number. So because he called and texted my phone, I just typed his phone number in and I saw the onboarding selfie. I said, that's a man. And I called my dad and I said, this guy who was blocked from Giggle, has called and texted my phone. What should I do? And Dad said, block his number and don't tell your mother, because my mum sees the death threat. She knows everything that's going on. She watches the whole thing. And so I was like, okay, fine. And I tried to put it, I sort of did put it out of my mind because it really freaked me out. So I was just like, just ignore. And then about 2 months after that, I got the human rights complaint.
Incredible. So would you say that this was a concerted effort, that this was, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, to ascribe a kind of motive, but
I can't put a motive to it, but what I can comment on is what I do know in black and white. So I'd had one interaction with this person on Twitter, not knowing who he was. I mean, he has like, I don't even think he has 200 Twitter followers. Like, we're not talking about some trans rights superstar here. He's a nobody. But in January 2021, I had tweeted about Mackayver Ladies Baths, which is this rock pool in Australia that has been like women only for like 140 years, since women weren't even allowed on other parts of the beach, and so they gave us this little corner. And it's where lots of like women going through cancer treatment, Orthodox Jewish women, Muslim women, and just women generally recovering, they might be recovering from domestic violence and want a day out at the beach, but they want to be in that.
Or not wanting some man to perv on their breasts when they're in a state of
It could just be a woman
undress.
just going, it's just actually really nice to not have men
we have
looking at
the
me.
Hampstead Women's Pond.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has now been taken away from us.
Yes. So Mackayver Ladies Baths was taken away from women as well. But so I was tweeting out in support of them. And this is when the first time when Australian trans rights activists, I think, sort of started to notice me. I'd only been publicly talking out about it all for about 6 months at this point. And so looking back, after I got the Australian Human Rights Commission complaint, I had to go back and find out about this person. And so I found that there was this one interaction. And it wasn't hostile or anything, but he had said, like, I am a trans woman and I should be in female-only spaces, something to that effect. And I was like, I wish you well, but no, female-only spaces are female-only. And what he'd actually commented on was a post I had done about trans rights activists leaving 1-star reviews and coming after the app. And me saying, this is what trans rights activists do to female-only spaces. So that is just undeniable of him being utterly aware of what the situation is. And I blocked him, again, not knowing who he was. I just blocked an account from my perspective. And the only reason I know the date that occurred is because he tweeted, Sall Grover, CEO of Giggle, has blocked me. He put it in writing, and then he went on the app.
I mean, it's a witch hunt, isn't it? It really is. And here you are now with, how long has this litigation been going on so far?
2 years and 2 months.
And people that haven't been through this sort of litigation have no idea how it drains your entire soul. It sends you to the point of breakdown. Mm-hmm. It sucks everything from you. It's hell. Psychologically,
it is very hard to process being punished in such a way, because the process is the punishment.
Yes.
So I feel I've already been punished. It is hard to process being punished for seeing a man and acting accordingly. Because that's actually all I've done.
That's right.
I didn't know this person's gender identity. So like, most people can't even define what gender identity is. Why am I supposed to know about it? I mean, on GB News a few weeks ago that Robin...
What's Moira White,
yeah, that dude.
Lawyer.
Yeah, so someone who's actually like a barrister, he was asked by Andrew Doyle, like, define gender identity, and he couldn't do it. And I'm like, he can't even do it, and he pretends he's a woman. Why on earth are we supposed to know what gender identity is and be able to incorporate that into our lives in any way?
And yet, Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, who, for many of us, was momentarily a hero when she made that speech about misogyny in Parliament, and it went viral, and we were all clapping her on, and there's a feminist. And what did she then do in 2013?
So she removed the definitions, or her government removed the definitions of sex, man and woman from the Sex Discrimination Act. So basically we have a Sex Discrimination Act now where the words discrimination and act have definitions, but sex does not. But gender identity was put into it, and it does have a definition in there, which is effectively gender identity is gender identity. It's a circular definition. Who knows what it is?
And it's about mannerisms. It's about a self-identification. It has no material reality.
One of the things about it, when you go, I don't know if it's in that core definition, but when they detail it further, they say gendered behavior. And I'm like, what is that? Because that is very subjective. Because from my position, Tickle's behavior could not be more toxically masculine if it tried. And then you could also argue that me just standing up and saying no and fighting back is masculine behavior in and of itself. So what is this gendered behavior?
It's
I don't even know.
Based on harmful sex stereotypes,
yes.
As feminists have always said, have we not?
Exactly. So I'm like, it's complete nonsense. And basically the muddling of the Sex Discrimination Act is why we're in this position. Prior to 2013, you could have just had a female-only space in Australia. There was no issue. The actual Sex Discrimination Act was in itself the exemption. It allowed it, so long as it was like for, equality and for reasonable reasons. But what female-only space wouldn't be? I can't even think of a female-only space that would not fit that description.
But it's also in terms of discrimination. If, for example, a woman is working in whichever environment and they don't want to give her maternity leave and she gets pregnant and they sack her. Now, how would that affect a trans-identified male?
Well, so this is what's really interesting. So the Australian Human Rights Commission has actually intervened in the case as amicus curiae, which is very normal. They intervene in cases all the time. But the Sex Discrimination Commissioner has intervened in the biggest sex versus gender case, arguably, that has ever happened, because it's completely directly dealing with the conflict. And the Sex Discrimination Commissioner is on the side of gender. So, like, adding to the conflict. And in the submission, they say that sex is not binary, it is not exclusive to male or female, sex can be changed. And then it's a 28-page document, I think, and I say to everyone all the time, I recommend reading it. It's publicly available on the Federal Court website of Australia. Type in Tickle v Giggle, you'll find it. Pour yourself a very stiff drink, because it is like a draft of 1984 that Orwell was like, no one's going to buy this. But the Australian Human Rights Commission went, we'll give it the old college try. We'll implement it. At one point, and this goes back to what you're saying about maternity leave. So they say that, well, they would use trans woman, but I would just say man, that a man's desire to be pregnant is sufficient for him to be considered a woman in law. And what they're doing there is going through all the different parts of the Sex Discrimination Act that are very specific to women, like maternity leave. And you need a law like that for women, because the desire to be pregnant, you could have a woman that's like 32, she's just gotten engaged, and an employer would be like, well, she's going to get pregnant soon, so we'll fire her so we don't have to.
Which is direct sex discrimination.
Exactly. So they're just including these men in that, and you're reading it going, but they can't get pregnant. Like, I'm sure some of them desire, well, we see them say it, that they desire to. It's a fetish.
This is wild. And so the case is going to the federal court in Sydney, is that right?
Yes.
And it starts in April.
9th to the 12th of April is the hearing.
This will have ramifications not just across Australia, it's federal, obviously, but elsewhere, because the UK is a signatory to CEDAW, which is one of the international instruments that women rely on to argue that government should protect its female citizens from discrimination, including male violence, rape, domestic abuse, etc. And Australia's a signatory, and you've ratified CEDAW.
Yeah, what's actually quite unique about Australia, apparently, is that we enlivened it by basically, we signed it in 1983, and then the Sex Discrimination Act came out in 1984, and we incorporated it very thoroughly. Australia and New Zealand are both very thorough in CEDAW being in our legislation, whereas some, like in the UK, for example, it's like, I don't know what my barrister explains it all to me like I understand legal stuff, and I don't. I'm much more than I do now.
We can choose to not use it if we wish.
Yeah, Parliament agrees with it, but yes. But
yeah, it's not binding.
No. So, but in Australia, like it effectively was. And so CEDAW is about biological females. Now, it also doesn't have definitions, because it was written in 1979 when no one thought it was necessary to have to. We were just talking, they were talking about women and girls. Like, who else would you be talking about? And so, but when you read it, everything they're talking about is clearly a document about biological women and girls, like females. You can't really dispute that. I'm sure people will try, but you can't. There's been some things like around the edges at the UN that they've tried to do. The Yogyakarta Principles is sort of the most famous one, where they've tried to do these different documents, but they have been rejected all the time. They are not signed by the 189 countries that CEDAW has. They've been utterly rejected. So that gender identity is just not part of this document.
But there's no such thing as gender discrimination. That does not exist. It's sex discrimination.
Well, the only way you would say that exists is if they were using gender as a synonym for sex, which they once kind of did. Especially in America, that was a big thing. But now you just can't even use that synonym anymore.
But for example, years ago when I was doing a piece of work for the UN. I wouldn't touch them with the barge pole now for obvious reasons, the women.
Yeah.
You know, they sometimes used the term gender-based violence, and they meant very, very specifically, they meant sex. But
Yes.
the word sex started becoming a little bit too embarrassing to use in case people thought it meant doing rude things. But it's so childish.
Do you know what? I'm starting to wonder, was anyone really having a problem with the word sex, or was this part of the plan?
Maybe.
Because, like, you could have just kept the word sex and just had biological sex and been like, everyone just grow up and deal with it. But they didn't. They created this synonym that is now the problem.
Well, talk to me about the case, because you can't lose it, because then sex would be obsolete and gender expression and identity would rule. And how would that work? It wouldn't, it couldn't. So you can't lose and he can't win.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the arguments on the other side and the implications as well.
One of their arguments against me is that I treat trans women differently to cis women. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. It's on the basis
Women
of
only
sex.
has to mean something.
I'm actually, it's like, I've got to use your stupid language, you're going to just have to acknowledge that I'm talking about males and females here. Of course,
in the way that
them.
Rachel Dolezal, who masqueraded as African American, is treated differently from an actual African American.
Completely.
In that she's white.
And then, but my argument then, like beyond that, is I'm like, but you want me to treat these people differently because you wanted me to moderate what women say based on the demands of this demographic of people. So you can't tell me to do something that you're punishing me apparently for doing. It doesn't make any sense. But nothing with gender ideology makes any sense. But I'm like, just every decision I've made here is on the basis of sex. Like we've been called trans exclusionary, like Giggle was, like from when we first came under attack. But I'm like, did any of you stop to think about females with a gender identity? Because they're welcome. They've always been welcome. And there actually were, like, Giggle's actually offline at the moment because of the case, but like females who had some kind of a gender identity, like we didn't police it. I didn't ask, but I would see them on there. Like even women who think men are women are welcome on the app. There's no thought policing here. The only prerequisite is that you are female. That's it. So in terms of gender identity discrimination, it doesn't make sense to me because in Australia, we don't have like a gender recognition certificate. The sex marker on birth certificates is what is changed. It's horrific. So they will be reissued birth certificates that say female. Incidentally, though, when they do, the birth certificate itself will say that it's been that part's been edited. So it's just this scenic route to confirm that they're still male.
Crazy.
It's so crazy. But I'm like, okay, so if you're telling me that this male is a female, then why isn't it sex discrimination?
Right.
Like, why bring gender identity into it? Something you can't define, that no one could have possibly have known. But even then, you would be saying that I should know what this man's birth certificate should say?
Because they want it both ways.
Yes.
And it's about destroying women's rights.
Yes.
Through the courts. And as you say, the process is the punishment. Mm-hmm. When will you know if you've been successful or not? Which, of course, you will be.
So, I mean, the hearing is from the 9th to the 12th of April. It could be July. It could be August. It could be a long time. And so just say we're not successful in the federal court, I would appeal it to the High Court. Definitely. I'm not backing down. And so the High Court in Australia is a court of appeals, and it's an error in law court. Mm-hmm. So we would be going to the High Court, argue, and you've got to apply. So you've got to be accepted. But we would be going there with a pretty strong argument because we'd be saying sex has been given no weight in the Sex Discrimination Act.
But gender has.
Yes. Whereas say if we win in federal court and say the other side wants to appeal to the High Court, which they could, and they could also be accepted, I have no idea. But they would basically be appealing, saying sex has been given weight in the Sex Discrimination Act.
I can't even believe that we're having this conversation about a case that's going to the federal court It's absolutely bonkers. It's crazy.
Well, the other craziest part is the censorship on it in Australia. So I'm in England right now because I was like, okay, airplanes exist. I have to get on a plane. No one in Australia, no media will speak to me about it. I email journalists every week, sometimes every day. And I'm no doubt that some of them have blocked my email at this point, but I still send the stuff to them. Because I would have thought things like, oh, the Australian Human Rights Commission saying that human beings can change sex, that's pretty newsworthy.
Right.
Like, that's a huge, big government body saying this. No, they don't. And the other thing is, in Australia, like say the ABC especially, they will report on how brilliant trans people are constantly. They'll also report on how oppressed they are constantly. So I'm even like, why aren't you guys writing articles in favor of Tickle?
Well, I think I could probably guess why. I think that he's not the greatest poster trans woman, however they define Tickle, for this argument. And I think that each time a case like this is heard, obviously it's the Maya Forstater one here, and Amy Ham is going on in Vancouver, the Canadian nurse who had the absolute neck to say that biological sex matters when you're a medical professional. But all of these cases, and also, of course, Mr. Wax My Scrotum, Jonathan Jennifer Yaniv, I think he called himself, or Jessica Yaniv, who ended up getting a load of Asian women who were on very low incomes, who refused to give him so-called beauty treatment to wax his female scrotum. So every time we have these cases that are played out in public, because we feminists and other supporters put them there in the public eye, mm-hmm. I think that the emperor's nakedness becomes more apparent. Yeah. And we see these men and these so-called allies and supporters for what they are.
Completely. I completely agree with you. I think that Australian media and the powers that be there, I think they know I'm right.
And that's why there hasn't been, from where I'm looking, across the kind of, LexisNexis databases of Australian media, looking at the mood music on this, I haven't seen the usual requisite 3-page spread about this trans woman hero taking on this vile bigot in order to allow for young trans people to be their authentic selves.
Yeah, I mean, when like Giggle sort of came out, there were quite a lot of feminists that had a problem with the name Giggle, which I'm hoping at this point I've earned the right for it, because there's lots of reasons for it. And I think just it worked out perfectly. It created the Tickle v Giggle name. I mean, like, on
we
what
literally
planet?
Could not have made it up.
You could not
in a Hollywood script.
You would have been told that's too on the nose. No one will believe that. Like, you have to change it. But I also think, I wonder if in the sort of even on their side, or people who think of themselves as supportive or allies would go, hang on, why is this like 50-something-year-old man wanting to use an app called Giggle? Like, there's just lots of questions that regular people could be asking based on that, because it is just, the whole thing is just wrong. Like, I often wonder how all of these so-called, like the progressives who are all in on trans rights, but say if it was a man who calls himself a man taking me to court, they'd all be on my side. But it's purely because this man calls himself a woman, suddenly I'm the bad one. No.
What can we do to support you? Obviously, you're crowdfunding. You need lots of money to take this case forward. We hope you don't need to go to appeal. But it's a very, very expensive process, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's for federal court, it's $500,000. We've raised $250,000 so far. If it goes to the High Court, and I will say there is a high chance that it will go to the High Court. So it's another year of my life as well. Like, just to put it into perspective, I was 15 weeks pregnant when I got the AHRC complaint. My daughter will turn 2 before we get a verdict on this. And if it goes to the High Court, she'll be 3 by the time this is all finished.
It's monstrous.
But so, I am thinking just long term, like, okay, we've just got to keep raising the money, because this could be $1 million in total. And in the event that we don't have to and we've got some excess money, there are so many other cases that need it, so we can just sort of pay it forward. So gigglecrowdfund.com, we created our own because we sort of had the resources to do it. And I'd seen that so many women had been kicked off like GoFundMe and whatnot. And you guys in the UK, you have crowd justice that's pretty good, that allows women to stay on. But you have to be a UK citizen to use it. So it was of no help to me, unfortunately. But it's sort of just one of the crazy things that happens along the way here. So we created our own, and then you have to have like a payment processing thing that you put in there. And I can't remember if it was Stripe or Square that we used first. And those two companies basically own all the minor ones as well. It's a duopoly. They both kicked us off.
You were kicked off.
Activist
Stripe
complaints.
and Square.
Yeah, Stripe and Square were banned. I'm banned from using both of them. And in that, I was like, so why do you get to choose who's on your platform? Because I'm just crowdfunding for the right to do what you're doing. That's the irony of this.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
But we can support you. We can also, of course, thank you very, very sincerely.
Thank you
for fighting this for women.
That's what I say to people when I'm just saying, like, please, I need the finances, I need the help. The only way I can repay you, other than like just my endless gratitude, is let's go and get our rights back. Like, let's just use it, get our rights back, and end this madness so we can all move on with our lives. As I said, we've all got other things to do. I want to go and get rid of the geriatric pregnancy word.
And, we have got all those little minor issues, like rape and domestic violence and femicide and FGM and all of those other issues.
All the things that are still happening. I did a tweet about this the other day. The reasons for female-only spaces have not gone away. So we should not be in a position to have to justify them. I'm sick of when people go, but why do you need a female-only space? Because we want them. That's enough for me. We do not have to relive the trauma we have gone through at the hands of men every time we want to defend why we want to be away from them occasionally. Just have a refuge away from you, whether it's online or in real life. And I think that, of course, there's going to be female-only spaces online because that's where we live up half of our lives now. There's going to be more of them. They're going to be in the virtual reality world because we're already hearing stories of women's avatars being raped. Like, men can't help themselves no matter what the situation is. And so, I just think that, like, the people who should be having to justify why they want to be in them are the men demanding to be in them. Because they're the only different thing that's happening here. We need them for all the reasons we've always needed them.
Well, what I would say personally to Roxy Tickle is go to the Garrick Club and see if they'll give you membership. And on that note, Sal, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And I just can't believe I'm meeting you. I'm so excited.
And same here. Thank you again for everything you're doing.
Thank you.